Hello and welcome to Rules of the Game, where three lawyers demystify the rules nonprofits have to follow when they're advocating on the issues they care about. I'm Tim Mooney.
I'm Quinn, too, and we're attorneys at Alliance for Justice's Boulder Advocacy program. Every day, we take calls and emails from nonprofits on how to safely and boldly take stances on women's health, climate change, civil rights, and much more.
On this show, we talk about some of the greatest hits, questions we get every day. We try to keep the jargon to a minimum, but if you're new to nonprofit advocacy, check out our starter video at boulderadvocacy.org/start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Rules of the Game. We are joined today by an extra special guest, Molly Coleman, who is the co-founder and executive director of the People's Parity Project. We are so impressed with what People's Parity Project is doing, what they are accomplishing. So, Molly, welcome. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Tell us about the People's Parity Project. What is it and how you got started?
Yeah, so we are a 501c3 organization working to harness the organizing power of lawyers and law students to build a legal system that works for the people, not corporate profit. So we do that largely through our chapters. We have a chapter model. So we have about 25 chapters on law school campuses and then lawyers chapters in cities throughout the country, and are using the organizers within those chapters to build a better vision of what the legal profession can be and what role the legal profession can play in building, a legal system that works for real people. So we do a lot of work around court reform at the federal level. We do a lot of work around state courts and building state court that serve true justice. A lot of organizing around worker power issues and the ways in which the legal system has really been designed to keep workers down. And then a lot of work around the culture of the legal profession, which for those who are listening who are lawyers or law students or law adjacent, you'll know that it's a very pro-corporate culture. And that has really harmful impacts on the shape, the power of our legal system. We've been around for just over 5 years, 5.5 years now, but started really just as a grassroots law student organizing effort. So when I was a 1L, started working with some of my fellow law students who had come to law school thinking that we were there to fight corporate power, to fight for economic justice, to think about how to undo systemic harm. And within a few months of entering law school, really found that that is not what we were being taught or trained to do. And we were actually being trained to uphold the status quo that we had come in to really fight against in so many ways. And so I started thinking about how do we utilize this unique position that we're in as law students, as future lawyers, to have a unique impact on the legal landscape. We started organizing around some big legal issues that were front and center at the time. So this was 2018. It was kind of the peak of the Me Too movement. So we started organizing around the legal constructs that had enabled the rise of workplace harassment and abuse. So things like forced arbitration clauses, non-compete clauses, non-disclosure agreements, so these really small contract provisions that actually have a really, really big impact on real people. So those were our early organizing campaigns, but very quickly we recognized that if we wanted to organize for a better legal system, a legal system that really works for real people, we couldn't just be thinking about contract provisions, right? We couldn't just be thinking about these small pieces of legal systems. We needed to think bigger. And so we started organizing around who sits on the Supreme Court, who sits on the federal court. Again, thinking about the unique role that lawyers and law students play in influencing or can play in influencing who sits in those positions of power and trying to do something different than what we saw too many in the legal profession doing. So that's where we started. By 2019, we had launched chapters at other law schools around the country. And in 2020, I came on as our first full-time executive director, and I've been here ever since.
Molly, thanks so much for making time to stop by and come on our show today. We're so excited to have you. And I wondered, as I was listening to you talk about the beginning or the inception of the People's Parity Project, who is it that inspires you to do this work, or where do you draw your daily inspiration from?
It's a great question. I will say currently I'm drawing so much inspiration from our law student organizers. So we actually just came off of our annual national convention where we bring together law students and lawyers from around the country who are committed to the work of building a more just legal system. And seeing students who are in their first, second years of law school who see the ways in which the legal system is rigged, who are working incredibly hard, both in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom to make real tangible change in the face of immense odds. It's so incredibly inspiring. And one of the things that we always say at PPP is that our organizers won't let us compromise. Our organizers won't let us give up because they continue to believe that a better future is possible and that lawyers and law students have played a big role in getting us to where we are in many really negative ways, that we therefore are obligated to try to do something better and build something better. So that for me, just seeing that energy and being reminded that there are people who are committed to this fight for the long term is really where I have been drawing my inspiration from lately. I think that the one other thing that I'll say is, as we've been building PPP over the last 5 years, we've drawn so much inspiration from people who are doing the really hard lawyering work, the organizing work as well, but I really want to call it the lawyers who are doing this incredible work on the ground, who are facing immense odds in and out of the courtroom every single day, who are going up against a captured legal system, but who continue to fight for their clients, who continue to fight to find, even small bits of justice within a rigged legal system. And it's just a reminder that this work is incredibly important. Yes, it's hard, but we have to keep trying because the alternative is giving up, and that's completely unacceptable. That leaves more and more people behind. So that's where I get my inspiration from, and I think that's where many of us at PPP find our inspiration.
That's really awesome to hear. And the thing that I'm really drawn to with the organization is that it's made up of law students, new attorneys, and the energy that comes from that. But there's kind of a give and take with that. What are some of the learning curves you face in this work as a organization made up of law students and new attorneys? But what's the balancing advantages that you have from the perspectives that you bring?
Learning curves is a nice phrase. There are a lot of ways in which we struggle. Some of that is, I think, the skills that law school teaches you, that the practice of law teach you, are necessarily the skills that you need when you're building a new organization or when you're organizing or when you're thinking about advocacy outside of the courtroom. The law schools do a arguably decent job of training you to litigate. They don't necessarily do a good job of training you to build out a vision or think about how to execute on that vision or how to imagine a better world. You're really trained to think about how to work within the world as is. And that makes it difficult to then come out of law school and think about, well, what can the world be and what should the world be and how might we get there? So, certainly our board, our staff, that's something that we're working to unlearn in many ways what law school taught us and to learn new skills that we didn't learn there. And I think that's true of our organizers as well. But I will say, so there's a ton that we have to think about and be really intentional about given our organizing base, given the composition of our staff and board. But we think that it's essential that lawyers and law students be a part of these conversations about how to create change. Again, we know that lawyers, specifically members of the legal profession, played an outsized role in crafting the system as is. And therefore, if we forget about law students and lawyers as we try to build a better future, we are going to continue to have this very powerful force working on the side of the status quo, working to defend the status quo. And so we have to work within this population. We have to work within this community if we want to achieve the big structural change that is so necessary that we are all here fighting for. So having this unique organizing base is hard, but it also makes us feel worthwhile. And it really makes us feel like we are able to have an important impact that is a necessary component, not the sole answer or anything at all, but a necessary component of the fight for change.
What you said about law schools not preparing people in certain ways, like you're right. Law school is great if you're going to be a litigator. And so many of us don't end up walking that path where we walk. If you're like me, you walk for a few years and then you bail because there's more fun things to do. Do you have any thoughts on how you would reform law schools at all? And is it a part of what People's Parity Project is doing as well?
Oh, yeah. Should we reform law school? Definitely yes, is our position. And I think that there are a couple of things that really come to mind. One is how we teach people in law school, starting on day one, about the fact that the way that our legal system currently operates is a choice. That's something that we talked about a lot at our convention this weekend, is the fact that we have chosen to have a legal system that operates in the way that it does, where we have the types of judges with the types of power that we currently see in our system. We can make different choices. From day one of law school, we think that you should be told that this is a choice. There are other alternatives available, and start flexing that muscle of thinking about what could be and what should be, what works in our current system and what doesn't work. And that's something that could be built into the 1L curriculum. It could also be something that is done through pre-law training programs, through student organizations, through advocacy organizations like ours. But instead of acting throughout the 1L curriculum like the law is something that is handed down from above and the legal system is untouchable, we can't imagine anything better, it doesn't have to be like that. We're also, something that our organizers have really been focused on over the last couple of years is thinking about what other skill sets should be taught in law school, and recognizing that people go to law school and then often go into policy work, often go into organizing and other advocacy work. Those are skills that could be taught in law school that are just as important to the creation of law as litigating. And so there's a growing movement, I would say, to really push law schools to train their students in ways that will be actually useful for their future careers. And frankly, that will help people find more satisfying careers because, Tim, like you said, I think a lot of people go to law school, are trained to litigate for a couple of years, and then are like, I actually don't want to be doing this, but aren't sure where to go, aren't sure how to think about shaping and applying the law in other ways. And law schools could do a much better job of helping people see the different career paths and the different ways that you can think about the law outside of a courtroom.
Molly, if you ever consider being a dean of a law school, you have my 100% support based on everything you just said.
Like that a true nightmare job.
So after we've dismantled the law school system as it currently is, what were some of the thoughts that you have about what we can fix in the legal system?
Yeah. So I think that there are a couple, I could spend 6 hours answering this question, so I'll try to keep it concise. What are things that we need to fix within the legal system? The first thing I would say is we need to change how the public engages with the legal system. How the public is exposed to what's actually happening in courtrooms across the country at the state or federal level, how the public is involved in judicial selection and judicial oversight, judicial accountability. That's one thing that we think about a lot, is the way in which lawyers have set themselves up as gatekeepers to the legal system and have decided that they're the only people who can understand what's happening in courtrooms, who can talk about what's happening about courtrooms, who should have full influence over who becomes a judge. It just isn't true. Every single person in this country is impacted by the legal system, is impacted by what judges decide, is impacted by the cases that are heard in our courtrooms. And so every single person has a vested interest in ensuring that legal system really is working for real people. So we think that it's critical to build mass public engagement with the legal system, whether that's in the fight for court reform at the federal level, whether it's in the fight for better judges, whether it's through court watching programs where we're actually telling the story of what decisions are coming out of chambers and what impact do those decisions have on real people. I think that that's absolutely essential. I think once we build that mass public engagement and once people are really able to understand the impact of these rulings, the impact of our legal system as it currently operates, then we can get into specific changes, right? Then we can talk about things like, is the development of the forced arbitration doctrine that we currently see, is that good or bad? And if it's bad, what would a legislative fix look like? That's when we can get into large-scale public conversations about the types of judges that we want to have and how we can get more better pro-people judges on the bench. That's how we engage people in conversations about what power should the courts have, period. Who should decide in our country? Should it be unelected and unaccountable judges at the federal level, or should it be Congress and our democratically accountable representatives? These are all changes that you could imagine making, but they have to start through public engagement. That, to me, is kind of the foundation of all of the future changes that we want to see.
We may have broken a record on this podcast by going the longest between the mention of 501c3 and when you first mentioned it, Molly, and however many minutes deep we are in now. So I'm going to ruin all of that. You are a C3, as you mentioned. How does the structure of being a public charity help what you're doing? And I mean, you have a ton of bold ideas and bold projects ahead of you. How does being a C3 help that? And how does it kind of hinder it? Because I'm sure that there are some places that you'd love to be able to go from an advocacy perspective that maybe the C3 status is a little limiting. What's your thoughts on that?
So the really interesting question, and one we've thought about, and I guess just read a little bit of context for where we've had this conversation internally. So we actually just launched a 501c4 organization as well, People's Parity Project Action. We had our formal launch party on Saturday, which is very exciting. So this is all a little bit new for us. But when we were starting to talk about launching the 501c4, we had conversations with our organizers about if that's the direction we wanted to go in organizationally. I think for some of us on staff and on the board, we were like, well, of course, 501c4s have more flexibility. They're able to engage in the electoral work. It's a no-brainer that we would want to do C4, have a C4. And what we heard from our organizers is that they actually wanted us to keep the bulk of our work as C3 focused. They were excited about the idea of launching a C4. They were excited about the ways in which that could complement some of the work happening through our C3. But they felt very, very strongly that PPP's unique value was in our work as a 501c3. And some of the things that they brought up when we were having those conversations that our organizers brought up was the ways in which it forced them to keep a lot of their focus on education, on real organizing, on building mass public support for their efforts rather than, just going through elected officials as the only avenue for change, or just thinking about electoral work in the way that other groups on campus might, like law school Democrats or whatever the case may be. So they really felt like it enabled us to do important work and force them to think creatively about how to go about that work because of the 501c3 restrictions. And I thought that was really, really interesting and something that I hadn't necessarily thought about as a benefit to being a 501c3. I thought a lot as RED, I thought a lot about fundraising and kind of the benefits of fundraising as a C3, but not so much about how that really shaped our advocacy strategy and our organizing strategy in a really powerful, unique, creative way. So yeah, I guess that's what stands out to me. The one other thing that I'll say is organizing is really hard. When you have organizing as your theory of change, as I'm sure many folks listening can attest to, it's a hard path to walk. Sometimes it feels like it would be easier to just try to influence a few key elected officials or a few key candidates in a couple of different races. It's harder to do grassroots organizing or grasstops organizing. And I think by being a C3 organization, we've been forced to stay true to our values and not take the easy way out, but to really do the hard work to build the world that we want to see. Which again, upsides and downsides to that. I could certainly talk about the downsides, but I think it surprised me how many upsides there have been to that.
Yeah.
We spend so much time, talking about what C3s cannot do, but we spend an equal amount of time on this show talking about what C3s can do. And the ability for C3s to really push for change is only as great as your imagination, for lack of a better word. Are there any current projects that PPP is engaged in that you want to share with our listeners?
One thing that I'll share that we're really excited about, and again, that we've been thinking about creatively because we are a C3. I like the use of the word imagination. When you're talking about like skills that law school doesn't teach you, I don't think you're taught that you need to be creative and imaginative, and yet what we see is that
no way. I mean, we're all about precedents and citing,
And
I have to check my transcript. I don't think there was a creativity 101 in law school. No.
But when you're really thinking about what should the law be, you have to be creative. You have to be using your imagination. And that, I see our organizers deploying incredible creativity and imaginative thinking every day. So one of the ways in which we've been seeing that lately is the work that we're doing around state courts. So like I said, we launched our C4 and we plan to use our C4 to engage in state courts, state court elections in different ways than we've been able to thus far. And that's exciting and important and everything else. But what I've been excited about is seeing the ways in which our chapters, in particular, our student organizers and our staff, have been able to engage in doing public education work around state courts as a C3. So one example, we about a year and a half ago started producing state court reports where we looked at the composition of state benches to understand who's on those benches. Is it public defenders and former legal aid attorneys, workers' rights attorneys, or is it predominantly former corporate attorneys and former prosecutors like we see at the federal level? Once we understand who's on the bench, what rulings are we seeing coming from those judges? What impact does that have? How are we then taking those reports, this data collection that we're doing, which is time intensive and very laborious for organizers, and translating it into information that is accessible for people, that is accessible for other organizers, nonprofit advocates on the ground who can then think about what would a strategy for change look like? And if we don't like the composition of the bench as it currently is, what would it look like to change that? And certainly in states where, so we've learned through our conversations with Boulder Advocacy, particularly in states where judges are appointed as a C3, we're able to engage a ton in those states, in those judicial selection processes. And we've really started to see just in the last year how much a group of dedicated organizers can influence the judicial selection process in really exciting ways and in ways that hopefully lead to more pro-people state benches. So that's one of the things that we've been really, really excited about as of late.
Well, by now, folks who are watching and listening are absolutely ready to run through a wall for you all. How can anybody who's listening or watching get involved? How can students who are interested in looking to start a chapter, how can they get involved? I'm also going to make sure that we put your website in there with this fancy banner thing. Look at that.
Very fancy. I was just going to say, sorry to be this person, but yeah, go to our website, peoplesparity.org. I will say, so a couple of things. We're always looking for law students and lawyers to join our organizing network, whether that's through joining a chapter in their city or on their campus that already exists, or starting one with the support of our team. There isn't a chapter in their area. We definitely want to be talking to you if that's something you're interested in doing. The other thing I'll say is that we're always looking, especially as we build out our campaigns, our advocacy, our organizing campaigns, we really want to make sure that we're connecting to other organizations who are thinking about how to build a better legal system for real people. And so if you're not a lawyer, you're not a law student, but you're involved in a nonprofit that might share some of this vision, share some of these goals, we want to be working with you. We want to be connected. So we really hope to continue the conversation in that way.
I really wish that PPP was around when I was in law school, but I guess the message from today's show is it's not too late, right?
It really, really is not. That's one of the things that we've been talking about a lot lately. Things are hard, but it's not too late on any of this.
Well, we really appreciate all the work that you've been doing and the fight that you continue.
Thank you so much.